Hello, my name is Jenny Langeveld, and it's great to have you with me once again. And today I've got a message. Now, at first it's going to sound as if it's a rough message, but it's not really. It's actually good news. So just stay tuned. It's going to be a bit of a long message, but I really feel I have to share this whole story with you. Now, the title of this message is "You Have Been Born for This Battle." So you must remember that. This message is about you, it's about me, but really you've been born for this battle because you and I are in a battle. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, we're in a battle. Now, how this message came about, yesterday morning, I just started reading, and I started reading in the book of Esther. And I started reading from chapter 2, and as I started reading, I just realized I have to take notes because this message is related to the presidential election in November of this year, of 2020. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background how I really got involved in praying for the American president, because in March of 2016, I received a word from the Lord where the Lord spoke to me and He said, I want you to pray for Donald Trump because he's going to be the next president of the United States. Now, this was news to me. I didn't really know much about Donald Trump. I was born in South Africa, so there we didn't really hear much about him. I knew of him, but Judy knew more about him because she grew up in Canada. So at that time, we started praying for him since March of 2016, and as you know, the election was in November of that year as well. Now, at one point, I was really doubting whether I heard correctly from the Lord. Now, also just on the side note, I didn't publish this anyway. I told many people in the United States, but I didn't publish anything like some other people, so that I can say, but I've been credible or whatever. But that doesn't bother me. It's not that important to me. However, so we started praying for him, and at times it didn't feel as if our prayers were doing anything, because I didn't even think at one stage that he was even going to have a slight chance to actually win the presidential election. Now, why do I say that? When we looked at the news media, it was just terrible. He did everything wrong, and there was absolutely nothing good about him. Anyhow, so I decided I'm not even going to watch news anymore. So we didn't watch the news, but the night of the election, or the day of the election, and specifically that night with the election results, we watched the results on the Believer's Voice of Victory network. Now, this is a network that really looks at everything through the eyes of faith, or through a spirit of faith. And it's hosted by Kenneth Copeland Ministries. And this was very interesting. And obviously they only had Christians on this program, and they really gave insight into many things that I didn't even know about at the time. So that was very interesting to us. And I think it was that night where everything started changing, because up to that time, I think it was around 8 o'clock that night, it still looked as if Hillary Clinton was going to win and Donald Trump was not going to get anywhere. But then the graphs and everything started changing. And obviously I was excited about this because this is something that God spoke to me and to Judy, and we've been really diligently praying for him. Now, what happened after that, we've constantly been praying for the president, for the United States. And why? Why would I, being born in South Africa, now I'm living in Canada, why would I be praying for the United States so intensively, I can almost say? It's because it feels to me there's a spiritual dark cloud over the entire world, and everything is almost focused on the United States. So when the United States goes down, everything goes down. And this is the revelation that I got. When we get to nail these things in the spirit, over the United States, the entire world is going to almost have to a sigh of relief, because this whole cloud is going to lift. We're still going to have to fight our battles as we're supposed to, but I believe that's really going to make a significant difference, because I was never involved in politics. I didn't want to know anything about politics. And since I got born again in January of 1992, I was even told that as a Christian, you don't have to pray for politics. Please don't get involved in politics or any worldly stuff, because Jesus is coming back soon and you don't have to have anything to do with that. And that's a lie from the pit of hell. You and I must be involved in the worldly system. Jesus said, go out in the world. And also where he teaches us to pray in Matthew, he says, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Let your kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. So that's a premise that you and I, as children of God, have to do. We have to establish God's kingdom here on the earth. Yes, He is the one that established it, but you know what? He always uses people. He uses you and I. And that's why I said right in the beginning, you are born for this battle, because we're really in a battle. We've always been in a battle, but this battle it's kind of serious. And we really have to take heed on this. Now, on Sunday night, that was the 23rd of August 2020, Judy and I were praying, and all of a sudden I just said to her, and I said to the Lord, I don't really have a word for this election. So I can pray, but I don't really have anything specific. And I just asked the Lord, that He will give me something. And then on Monday morning, I went to my room, and I call it my control room, where I'm sitting and I'm just sitting there, I'm reading, and anyhow, that's where I received this word on Esther, and I started reading from chapter 2. Now, I'm going to relate this to you. This is not a verse by verse thing, so I'm going to tell you the story. It's fairly in detail, but I want you to keep track of what's happening here, because it's so interesting to see how God deals with His people, and especially when His people, you and I, and at this time, where it's almost as if the church want to be killed totally. Christians are being silenced, churches are not being able to congregate, and it's just limitations upon limitations. If a Christian speaks up and he says anything about any person's sexual orientation and stuff, they hammer that person. And it's nonsense. It's wrong, because we are made in God's image. He made man and He made a woman. And He made man for woman, a man for his own wife, and a wife for her own husband. That's very important for us to acknowledge and to understand. So there's a lot of stuff. You know about all these things, so I'm not going to delve too much in that. Now, in chapter 2 of Esther, where I started reading, this is where King Ahasuerus, he's the Persian king, and that's where he sits and he's thinking back on what just happened. Now, what happened, he had a banquet, and he showed forth all his pomp and glory and all this stuff to a lot of his friends and to a lot of people from all over the place. And I think it was sort of the last night, or towards the end anyhow, he had too much to drink, and he wanted the queen, Queen Vashti is her name, he wanted her to appear there so that he can sort of parade her before all these men, and she refused to do that. And he was very upset. He was very, very mad with her, and even the people, all his counselors and everything, and they said to him, this is terrible, because if you allow this, all the women in this entire kingdom is going to rebel against their husbands. They're going to do whatever they want. Now, you must remember, this is many, many, many decades or many centuries ago, thousands of years ago. And the reason why it was so great for them, because in those cultures, even today, countries that are under the Islamic faith, it's sometimes it's cruel in those countries. Judy and I have been in countries where the women are not even allowed to sit next to the table in a restaurant. They have to sit on the floor with the children, and the husband passes down the food to them. So this is the kind of culture that this book is also playing off in. So that's maybe just some interesting news for you so that you know why this happened. So what these young counselors did, they said to him, okay, so in order for you to get a new queen, we will send out report to bring all the beautiful young virgins, to bring them to the capital city of Shushan, and then for a year they will be prepared, and then the selected ones, they will be paraded before you, and you will be able to test them, and the one that you like or that you fall in love with, that will then be the new queen. So that will be your choice. So all this happened, and there was a young girl, her name is Esther, and that's the book is named after her. Now she was an orphan, and her uncle adopted her. Her uncle's name was Mordecai. And these things are important because they are sort of the two main characters in this entire message that I'm bringing to you. So Mordecai took Esther into his home, and he rose her up. So he raised her up, and so she was very beautiful, and she was really a fair young lady, and they took her as well. So they took her to the palace as well, and they took her to the harem where they were going to prepare them for a whole year. So the person who was in charge, they really liked Esther and the whole story. So after a year, they paraded these young girls, and when the king saw Esther, he absolutely loved her more than any of the other women, and he made her the new queen. So he crowned her as the new queen. And so being an orphan and being raised by her uncle, Mordecai was obviously caring for Esther, and he wanted to know what was going on with her. So he sat at the king's palace gate, the king's gate specifically. He was sitting there every day and wanting to get news from Esther. So she knew about it, so she would send him messages and so on. So, but anyway, so he was sitting there at the king's gate, at the palace. And while he was there every day, he overheard two men. And these guys were upset with the king, and they wanted to lay their hands on the king. They wanted to harm the king and possibly even kill the king. So what he did, Mordecai, he sent a message to Esther and said, go and tell the king. So Esther, being queen now, she took the message to the king, and they investigated this, whether this is true. And they found that it's true, and immediately these two guys, they were hung on a gallows. So they were executed right away. And so throughout this time, there was a man called Haman, Haman, and he was one of the princes. He must have been a very wealthy man. And King Ahasuerus promoted him, and he elevated him to second in charge in the kingdom. He even took off his signet ring from his finger, and he gave it to Haman, and he said, you second in charge, you can basically do what you want. And because Haman was promoted to such a high position, everyone, all the other princes, all the people in the country had to bow down before him. But Mordecai, being a Jew, he decided he's not going to do that. He's not going to bow down before this guy. And he didn't. So the young men in the king's gate that were also gathering there, that saw him every day, they said to him, why don't you bow down before Haman? And he just ignored them. And it went on for a while, and then they decided, but they're going to tell Haman. And then they also found out that Mordecai is a Jew. So they told Haman that Mordecai is a Jew and that he doesn't want to bow down before you. He didn't notice it up to that time, but obviously now it was brought to his attention, and he saw that Mordecai did not bow down to him. And he got so angry, but he restrained himself because he realized if he only got Mordecai, then he will not be able to get his hands on the Jewish people. And that's really was his intention. For some reason, he hated the Jewish people. So he restrained himself, and he went to the king, and he basically told the king a bit of a lie. And he said to the king, he said, there's a people in your kingdom. They were brought here from somewhere else because the Jews were in captivity. They were brought into Babylon from their own country because of their sins and everything that they caused against God. And God said, if you don't repent, then I'm going to take you out of your country, and I'm going to send you into exile into Babylon, which happened. So he said, these people, they are different people. They don't bow down to anyone else's laws. They don't regard anyone else's laws, and they don't obey your laws even. And the king said to him, you know what, you go ahead, you do what you see fit. So what Haman did, he started writing a decree in the king's name, because now he had the king's signet ring, so he could sign this decree as if it's coming from the king himself. So he got the king's scribes and counselors, and they started writing this proclamation or this decree. And it said, on the 13th day of the 12th month, all the Jews in the entire kingdom of King Ahasuerus had to be destroyed. They had to be killed, men, women, children, everything, and that the people could plunder them. They could take everything that the Jews owned, and that they could take that as plunder for themselves. Now, here I just want you to take note. Look at the similarities of what's happening today, where I started off in the beginning, where I shared with you how the church today, everything that the church does, the Church of Jesus Christ, is wrong. Everything. Christians are nailed for everything. And it's as if they really want to destroy the Church of Jesus Christ. But now I want you to note here, it's not really so much about you and me. It's about God himself. They hate God. This whole socialist, communist thing, they hate God. And it's God that they want to get out of the picture. Because when you and I are steadfast in the Word, we're grounded and we have a solid foundation, nothing can shake us. Nothing can take us away from our values and from our principles, and our characters are solid. And they know these things. But that's why with the news media and everything, the propaganda that goes out is just terrible against the church. So this is very interesting, because Haman really discredited the Jewish people. So he was like the news media today. He didn't tell the truth and in order for him to get his way. And what he also did, he offered the king 10,000 talents of silver. Now I went and I checked in silver value today, because the silver's price went up incredibly since about May, June of this year. It almost doubled in price. So in today's terms, the amount of silver that he was going to pay for to the king for destroying the Jewish people is almost 24 million US dollars. That is the value of 10,000 talents of silver. Now, this is a huge amount of money that someone is willing to pay to destroy people. Now, again, look at the news media. They pay. There are billionaires that are paying and financing this whole thing against principles, against people's freedom, against the United States, every free country. They want to take away your freedom and my freedom. They actually want to destroy you and I. That's really their intention. And I just want to point out here, in contrast, when Judas, when he was going to betray Jesus, and he went to the Jewish priests to tell them he will give Jesus into their hands, he will betray him. You know what they paid him? They paid him 30 pieces of silver. Now, in today's terms, with a high value of silver today, it's about $380. Now, take this $380 compared to 24 million US dollars. It's a huge difference. That was what one man was willing to take to destroy Jesus' life. We know this is all prophecy. It had to happen, otherwise you and I or no one in the world would be able to be saved. But this is just a comparison, so I just want you to keep that in mind as well. So the king approved of Haman's plan, and so what they did, they sent out messengers throughout the entire kingdom. Now there were 127 provinces all across the world, and it was a massive kingdom, the largest up to that time in history. And they sent this decree out all over the world, throughout all these provinces, and they told the people. Now you can think for yourself, when the Jewish people heard of this, they were devastated. And even Mordecai, when he heard the news, he was devastated, and immediately he went into a state of mourning. He rent his clothes, and he put on sackcloth, and he put some ashes on his head, and he was not allowed to go into the courts of the palace again, because they didn't allow anyone who was mourning. He didn't allow anyone in there. So he was just in the city square. And even all the Jews throughout the kingdom, and also Esther, when she heard about this, I mean, they were distressed because they knew what this meant. And although Esther was in the king's palace and she was the queen, she was a Jew, and you don't know what would have happened to her. So Esther sent a message to Mordecai, to her uncle, through one of her slaves, and she asked him what to do. She wanted to know from him what she needed to do. And Mordecai sent a message back. He said, you know what? I want you to go to the king and start pleading for us, for the Jewish people, to plead for our lives, that he will overturn this thing. And Esther immediately sent news back. And she said, you know what, for the past 30 days, the king has not called me, so I can't just go into his presence. I can't just go into his chambers, because if I go there and he didn't call me, they're going to kill me. There's only one exception. If he puts out his scepter or stretch out his scepter towards me, then it means that he accepted me and I can come in. Now here again a note, why did this happen? In the Persian Empire, if the king didn't call anyone into his chamber or into his presence, and someone just walked in there, they would kill that person immediately without asking questions. Doesn't matter who it is, whether it's the queen or the second in charge, doesn't matter. If he didn't invite the person in, they just killed them. And that's why Esther sent this message back. But now listen to what Mordecai's response is. And I'm going to read this to you. He says here, do not flatter yourself and think that you shall escape in the king's palace any more than all the other Jews. He said, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance shall rise up for the Jews from somewhere else. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? Now listen to this. And who knows? Maybe you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this, and for this very occasion. That was Mordecai's message back to Esther. He said, you shouldn't think that you being the queen, you're going to be safe, and you're going to lose your life as well. So you need to do something, and maybe you have been raised up for this time. And remember what I said to you in the beginning. You have been born and been raised up for this battle. This is your battle. It's my battle. You've got your race that you have to run. You've got your battle that you have to fight. I've got my race. I've got my battle. I cannot fight your battle. You cannot fight my battle. but each one of us have to do what we need to do. And I'm going to share a little bit more on that as we go along. But that's very important. And immediately Esther sent a reply back to her uncle, and she said, good, I will do it. But I've got a request from you. Please go and ask all the Jewish people all across the country, all across the provinces, and get them to fast and to pray with me for 3 days. And she said, no water, no food. And that's rough when you don't have water. I mean, with food you can go, but without water. So that even is harsh. But anyhow, so Mordecai sent a message back. He got the people mobilized, and they all started fasting. And Esther did exactly the same. She even, the people that were around her, the young girls who were tending to her, even them, she got them to fast with her. And again, just think about this. What would you do in a similar situation? What would you do if all of a sudden it's being said that your whole family and your whole nation, say for example Canada, the entire Canadian population is going to be wiped out? What are you going to do? That's of course if you live in Canada. Wherever you live, it doesn't matter where you live. But if it's being told you that everything is sort of on the line, what are you going to do? How are you going to react? And let me share the story with you where Judy and I was in a crisis. For me, it was a crisis at the time. This is many years ago. I just got to know Judy. We were not married yet, and she was visiting me in South Africa, and we just felt that she had to go back to Canada. And I honestly didn't know whether I was going to see her again. And it almost felt to me like Abraham with his son Isaac. And it felt to me as if I had to sacrifice Judy. And I said to her the day on the airport, I said, my darling, I don't know whether I'll ever see you again, but I trust God that He will bring us back together again. And it was about 9 months later that the Lord released me. So I came to Canada, and I actually came to get her. We went back to South Africa where we got born, where we got married. And I'm just sharing that story with you because each one of us go through crises in our lives, and the Lord always sends a salvation, even if we don't really know what's going to happen. So, but stay tuned. The story is really getting interesting. So, on the third day, Esther got dressed with her royal robes, and she went into the inner court, and she stood there, and the king saw her. And when he saw her, immediately he put out his scepter, his golden scepter, toward her, and she walked and she touched the scepter, meaning he acknowledged her, and he actually invited her into his chamber. And he was very happy to see her, and he said, my dear, what do you want? What is your request? And he said to her, he said, I will give you even half of my entire kingdom, whatever you ask. Now think about that. This king was willing to give her half of his entire kingdom. And those guys were very wealthy at the time. So if she was after something like that, she would have gotten it. But that was not on her mind. And here again, just a little side note. Jesus is willing to share His entire throne with you and I. Not just half of His kingdom. Just think about it. He says, you are seated, you as a born-again child of God, you are seated with Christ at the right hand of God. He shares His entire throne with you and I. God is so different. He's got good thoughts for you. He's good stuff for you and I. So although the story is getting rough, and it's even probably going to get a little bit more rough, but just look at the end. Just trust God and seek His face and listen to His voice. He's always got good things for you and I. He's always got that salvation for you and I. And so what Esther said to the king, she said, I want you, O king, and Haman, I want the two of you to come to a banquet that I've organized for you tomorrow. So the following day, she wanted them both to come to a banquet. So Haman was invited, and he was very happy about it. And so the next day when they sat there, the king again said to her, he said, what is on your heart? What do you want? And she said, you know, I've arranged another banquet for tomorrow. So if you and Haman will come to the banquet tomorrow, then I will tell you my request. I will tell you what is really bugging me. That's why I came to you. So she didn't say anything. And at this time, the king also did not know that she's a Jew. He did not know what her background was. And she didn't tell anyone, because Mordecai was wise enough to tell her, don't tell them everything. So that's also an important note. Don't tell everyone everything. They don't always need to know what is going on in your life, everything. They don't need to know. Only when you feel it's necessary, then you share with people, because people many times take the stuff that you and I say and they use that to ensnare us. So it's not a good idea to just every time tell people everything. And that doesn't mean you're lying to people. You're not. Okay. So Haman was very excited about this, that the king, the queen, invited him to a banquet, and the following day, again, just the king and him. So he was so pumped up. He was very, very excited. So he went home, and he told his wife and all his friends. He called them all together, and he was just telling them about this thing that happened to him, that the king is happy with him. The queen is even drawing him in now, that, you know, just the two of them had at lunch with her, and the following day it's only going to be the two of them again. He said, oh man, this is so great. But on his way out, he again saw Mordecai, and he got so upset, so mad at this Jew that didn't want to bow down before him. And he told his wife, and he told his friends about this, and his wife and his friends said to him, you know what, why don't you build a gallows in the backyard and hang him on there? He said, man, that's a great idea. Then I can get rid of him. And so they said, and tomorrow morning, do it first thing. So first thing in the morning, go to the king and tell him what you're going to do, and just execute him before you even go to the banquet with him and the queen. So decided, and so he got his people to build this gallows in the backyard. Massive thing. I think they said it was 50 L in height, which is very high. I didn't check out the measurement, but it's very high. And here I'm just going to throw in a side note to you as again, you know, here with this whole thing of Haman that's telling his friends, and they have these bad things that they want him to do with this Jewish man, to go and hang him on this gallows, especially erect the gallows for him so that he can kill him. Now think about the news media today. The news media are owned by these dark forces, by these evil forces, people who are controlled by these evil and demonic forces. And they only try to indoctrinate people with false trash. I call it trash, with false stuff, false stories, false everything. But just wait, more is coming. So I'm going to share more with you. And now the next thing that happened is very important, and it's to do with history, because during this night, this same night where Haman, on the day that Haman erected this gallows, this particular night, the king couldn't sleep, and he called one of his men and he said, bring the book of the Chronicles of the King, where everything is recorded, what happens in the kingdom. And he said, come and read to me. And while this man is reading to him, he reads about Mordecai that told the king about these two guys who wanted to harm the king, and that it was found that it was true, and these two men were executed. And the king said, what was done to this guy Mordecai that to honor him? because of what he did for me. And this guy said nothing was done for him. And the king said, oh, that's not so cool. And he said to this young man, he says, who's in the inner court? Now it was early in the morning. And he said, who's in the court? And they went and they looked, and it was Haman, because Haman decided he's going to come early so that he can do harm to Mordecai. Now look at how God's salvation came. Just take note of this. Haman wanted to come early to solidify this thing where he can sort out Mordecai. But during the night, the king couldn't sleep. So the king said, bring Haman, bring him in. And before Haman could say anything to the king about Mordecai, the king said to him, listen, Haman, how would you honor someone who did well to the king and hasn't been honored in any way? What would you do? And just proud as he is, arrogant as he is, he thought it was himself that the king was talking about. And he said, you know what I would do with such a man, I would dress him in a robe that the king wore, and I will let him ride on a horse that the king rode on while the king was wearing his crown, and I will take this man and I will take him throughout the city and proclaim in front of him, this is what happens to a man who the king honors. And the king says, that is a great idea. He says, quickly, get the robes, get the horse, and you, Haman, you take this Mordecai and take him throughout the streets. And he says, do not neglect to do everything that you just told me should be done to this man. Call out before him and let the people just bow down before this man. Now you can see what happened here. Okay, so things does not look up so well for Haman all of a sudden. And this is the reason why history in our country and our countries across the world today are destroyed. Because it wants you and I to forget and even make you and I feel guilty that your ancestors and that my ancestors, that they sometimes paid with their lives so that you and I can live today, live a free life. That's why history is destroyed. This king, all the history was recorded, and that's how we found out that Mordecai was not honored. And look how God used this to turn this whole thing around. Isn't that cool? I find it very awesome. And here I also realized, when in today's days, it's as if let's just call them the left-wing media and everything. It's as if they're doing everything so blatant, as if they think they own everything, they have won everything, and they can dictate to everyone what is done. Now look how Haman came and walked right into a wall, and how his fate was started to turn very, very quickly. And I'm telling you today that this might just happen in your day and in my day, that we're going to see a turn in events, and even very quickly. So stay tuned. Okay, so the Haman went out, and he took Mordecai out, and he did exactly what he said. And after this, Haman rushed home, and he told his wife and his friends what had happened. And you know what his wife said to him? She said, oh, you know what? This Jew, which you wanted to harm, if you beginning to fall before this guy, you're going to be destroyed. That's almost as if she said, kill this guy. And now all of a sudden, she turns around and she says, you're going to fall before this man. And here I just want to point out to you, pride usually comes to a fall very quickly. Listen to what the scripture says in Proverbs 16:18. It says, pride goes before destruction, and an arrogant spirit before stumbling. So pride, God doesn't like proud people. He likes people who are humble. And destruction really comes quickly to the ungodly when they least expect it. And from the New Testament, 1 Thessalonians 5:3, while they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. This is Paul that's writing here, but it's very relevant even in our day today. Now, during the second banquet, while they were having a drink, again, the king said to Esther, Esther, what do you want? What is your request? And she said, you know, king, there's a man that wants to kill me, and he wants to destroy all my people. He wants to kill all my people throughout your entire kingdom. And I don't know what to do. She said, I need your help. And the king said, if this is true, who's this man? Where is he? And she turned and she pointed to Haman and she said, this is this evil man. He's my enemy. And the king got so angry, he jumped up from the table and he went into the garden just next to this room. And he was standing there and he was venting his anger. And Haman saw that this is not good news for him, and he realized his destruction is there. And what he did, he wanted to come to Esther and ask her to save his life. And she went to sit down on a couch. And just as the king came back into this room again, Haman was falling down next to the queen on this couch to plead with her for his life. And the king saw this and he shouted at him and he said, and now you even want to harm the queen right in my presence? And when he said that, the guys came, they covered his head and they took him out. And while they took him out, one of the young men there said, King, he made a gallows for Mordecai. And the king said, go and hang him on his own gallows. So the same day that he wanted to kill Mordecai, that very same day, Haman was hung on his own gallows. The gallows that he built for someone that he wanted to destroy, and he didn't really have a reason to destroy him. And so this is very interesting because if you look here at, I'm going to read you just a few scriptures. Psalm 9 verse 5, it says, you have rebuked the nations, talking about God. You have rebuked the nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have blotted out their name forever and ever. God blots out the wicked. Now this is Old Testament. Today it's a little bit different, but because these people can still turn to God, but if they refuse, they're going to basically be annihilated by their own decision. Psalm 37:38, but transgressors will be altogether destroyed. The future generations of the wicked will be cut off. So there won't be any future generations for the wicked. And Proverbs 14:11 says, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. So on that same day, right after this happened, that Haman was sent to be executed, the king gave Haman's house to Queen Esther. And Queen Esther immediately, she gave it over to Mordecai and gave him control over the whole house and the whole estate. And then she told the king that Mordecai was actually her uncle. And then she fell before the king and she said, oh, king, please. And she started pleading with him. And again, he put out his scepter to her. And she got up and she stood on her feet and she said, please, can you please overturn this thing? But there was something in the laws of the Medes and the Persians. If the king authorized something and the king signed something into effect, it could never be overturned. But what the king did here, he said to Mordecai and to Esther, he says, you devise a plan, you write it out, and here's my signet ring. He even gave his signet ring to Mordecai, and he said, okay, you proclaim a new decree so that you can reverse this in some way. And the wisdom that the Lord gave Mordecai and Esther was, what they did, they set up a decree where the Jews could defend themselves. On the 13th day of the last month of the 12th month, they could defend themselves against anyone who wanted to harm them. That's how they got past this thing. And this may be my own thoughts, but I believe as soon as God's people will be in a position to overturn things. We will soon be in that position where you and I will be able to overturn these ungodly rules and regulations, because it's important. We have to rule and reign in this life in Christ Jesus. Not like the worldly system rules, but it's important that you and I are involved in our communities so that we can let God's light shine. We have to. We cannot just stay within the four walls of the church or your house. We have to be out there, and we have to proclaim God's love and God's freedom. And so this new decree was sent out to all 127 provinces throughout the kingdom. And when the Jews heard this, they were so glad. That day they just took off, and they just jumped, and they rejoiced, and they just had a feast that particular day. And so eventually when the 13th day of the 12th month came, what happened, the Jews, under the leadership of Mordecai, they went and they destroyed everyone that was against them, all their enemies. And they killed 75,000 people throughout the kingdom of this king. And so that day they destroyed them. But what they did not do, they did not touch any of the possessions of these people that they killed. And that is the great thing. They didn't have to touch it, because God will always look after us. And here I'm just going to give you 1 Corinthians 15:57, which says, "But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ." So we have the victory. We don't even have to get it. He's already won the victory on the cross. So you and I have it. We must just work with Him and allow Him to work through us. And on this particular day, on the next day, on the 14th day of the 12th month, Mordecai and Esther proclaimed a feast day, and they call it the Feast of Purim, Purim. And till today, the Jewish people are still commemorating this feast, and they're holding it every single day, because Mordecai proclaimed, he said, for all generations, you are never allowed not to keep this feast. And that's what you and I are supposed to do. We should remember what God has done for us everywhere, and even record it. It's very important for you and I, when calamity comes, I heard one man said one time, he said, if calamity comes and you run into a wall or something, or challenges, he says, spin 180 degrees around and look for the victories that God has given you. And then you turn around and then you go forward again, because those things inspire you, it strengthens you. And here again we see how the Lord turned their mourning into dancing. And I'm telling you, you and I will rewrite history. In our time, we will rewrite it again. And just the last thing about Mordecai here, God really allowed him to be honored, because this King Ahasuerus, this Persian king, he promoted Mordecai to the second person in charge in the kingdom. So he was just below the king. And he loved Mordecai. And it says here, Mordecai the Jew was next to King Ahasuerus and great among the Jews, among his own people. Mordecai was a favorite with the Jewish people. And listen to the reason: because he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to his whole race. Isn't that cool? I think this is an amazing story, and I know this has been a long message, but I really trust that you get something out of this, because it's such a strong thing on my heart. And here I just want to share in conclusion just a few scriptures here. And the thing is to see the salvation of the Lord. Now this is where the Israelites left Egypt, and they were right there at the Red Sea. They didn't have anywhere to go. And on the one side was the sea, and on the other side was the Egyptians. Now listen to what Moses says to them. He says, "Fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians, for the evil ones, you have seen today, you have seen today, you will never see them again. For the Lord will fight for you, and you shall hold your peace and remain at rest. That's what trust in God really means. He keeps you and I in His rest, but it really means that you have to know Him. You have to know Him in a personal way. That's so important. And just note here that God is calling you to do what He tells you to do. God cannot do it on His own. It sounds almost weird to say that, but God cannot do it on His own. He needs your cooperation. He needs my cooperation, because here He also says in the next verses, right after this, listen to what the Lord says to Moses. He says, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward, lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. So God wants that relationship with you, because when He tells you to do something, then He wants you to do it. So please take this message, share this message, and make this message your own, because I believe you and I will see massive things happening over the next few months. The American election is not far away. It's just almost a few days. It happens on the 3rd of November of 2020. And so please take this message, make it your own, share it with people, because we need to get this message out. This is good news, because God doesn't only want him as a president there, but there's so many other things that has to be destroyed, things that are evil, and that I don't have the time now to share with you. But there are so many things that are at stake here. Your life is at stake, the lives of your children and their children even. Thank you so much for listening to me. I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.